Thanks, Colin. I realize I'm sort of the last thing between you and lunch, so I will try and go reasonably quickly here. But I got to tell you, I feel like a little bit of a fraud up here. Very nice things from the mayor and the Reeve, but I got to tell you, I never wanted this job. In fact, I ran away from it. Literally ran away from it. I was in a meeting with Brian Manning and the deputy ministers on the Monday morning after the fire, and people were talking about how to respond. My only contribution was that I had been involved when I was still in uniform with the Kelowna fires. And people were saying, this is just like Kelowna. And I said, that's the wrong mental model to have. This is like New Orleans in the floods. And I think that hope, that started to change people's dynamic of the impact on the town. And that was only from having watched what was on television. The next day I went to another deputy minister's meeting, and they were narrowing it down to who would be involved. And it was kind of the social ministries. It was housing, and it was employment and immigration, it was health, municipal affairs, those kinds of social ministries. And I was in energy at the time. And so I thought to myself, man, I pity the person who is going to get picked to lead this team. Because I know it won't be me, because I'm in energy. And I skipped and hopped back to my office. 3 hours later, I was in the Premier's office, and he said, you're the guy. And it's hard to say no to the Premier when he asks you to do this. I think he asked or he told. It was one of those two. But he, right from the very first time I spoke to him, he gave total support to this. And quite frankly, over the next 3 months, anything that I needed to help support Slave Lake, he provided, without question. But it was a busy week for me. Monday, Tuesday, I was not sure I was doing the job. By Wednesday morning, I was in Slave Lake with Dana Woodworth, who was leading emergency management at the time. And quite frankly, it was, my first impressions was it was a war zone. And quite frankly, I'm uniquely positioned to make that determination, because I've seen war zones around the world. But here was a group of people who were, as Denny had said, about 1,200 people in uniform, policemen, firefighters, EMTs. The uniform of the elected officials was boots and blue jeans and some kind of T-shirt. And I showed up there as the guy from Edmonton, from government, who was there to help. And it was a daunting task to be sitting in that room with about 50 people and me putting my hand up and saying, I'm from Edmonton and I'm here to help. But I did get a very warm reception. The challenge I found, though, that was on Wednesday. I very quickly learned that I should never respond to the Premier's office again. Because as I was driving back to Edmonton, in fact, I hadn't even left Slave Lake, I got a phone call from the Premier's office, so phone call number 2. He said, I have a little job for you to do. He said, the Prime Minister's coming on Friday. Can you organize that for us? Of course I can, Premier, of course I can. So as I'm trying to organize my team and think about what I'm trying to do, I was back there on Thursday and Friday to organize and then help Denny and Karina to host the Prime Minister and the Premier. In the process, I actually met my team, and I had 10 assistant deputy ministers working for me from a number of ministries, and I have to tell you, those individuals, who I won't go and name each one of them, were brilliant. They brought a level of technical expertise to the table that made my job really, really easy. But we realized early on that our job was to help folks who didn't have the training or the expertise to do this themselves. And you saw some of those pictures of the emergency operations centers. These are people who had literally been fighting the fire. These are people who have lost their homes. These are people that are struggling to eat well, sleep well, and they are now faced with this monumental task of not only dealing with the immediate effects of that fire, but dealing with the aftermath and the long-term visioning as they went forward. One of the things that I determined I had to do very quickly was to go up and start to build a rapport with the Tri-Council. And so I had started to set the conditions, but I took my entire team. I got the Dash 8 from the government. I took about 25 people up, and I had arranged with the Mayor and the Reeve to have a visioning session. And some of the councillors would remember we met in the gym of the college. And I had planned for the day, because I had this process that I wanted to go through that would link my team with the team in Slave Lake, that we would get certain things from them that would help me to build a plan that met their needs. And almost immediately, both the mayor and the Reeve said to me, you know, we're very busy. Do we have to do this? And so we had a little negotiation on the side, and we agreed that if they would give me the morning, I would turn them loose for the afternoon. But I've got to tell you, that was 3 hours that was very well spent from my perspective. We got to hear directly from the leaders of the community what they wanted for the future. We got them to start to think about not what's happening today, but what was going to happen in 3 months or 3 years. But perhaps more important than that, my whole team established a bond with the town that to this day stands. They were up there, they saw the devastation, they heard from elected officials what was important. And that particular event, in my mind, was probably the most important event, although the mayor and the Reeve may not have accepted it. But from my perspective, that was hugely important as we went forward. And I'll be short, what are my takeaways from this? Never answer the phone if the Premier calls. That's the first. Because the third phone call I got from him was, there's a royal visit, right? Just a small thing, and oh, by the way, you have to plan it, and you can't tell the mayor and the Reeve about it until 2 days before it happens. So because it was a long weekend, I actually got that 5 days before. So never answer the phone if the Premier calls. The fact that the local officials know their constituents, know what's happening, and this is not a derogatory comment. This is, we don't train them, we don't expect them to be able to handle crises of this magnitude. The fact that these two did as well as they did, I am still in awe of, quite frankly. Brilliant job. And I'll come back to them in a minute. But we need to work, and we need to be prepared to support decision makers. We need to be prepared to be criticized, and I was criticized on a number of occasions by members of council. I used to tell them, don't worry where the money's coming from. Make a decision. And I would see these emails that would come back, yes, but Tim told us it would be okay. It all works out at the end of the day. As long as your focus is right, you're trying to do the right thing, God forbid I would say this, don't worry about where the money's coming from. But that's it. Pick the right focus, remain focused on that, do the right things, and everything will work out. The other thing I learned out is there is a huge amount of capacity in the Alberta Public Service. I talked about the 10 assistant deputy ministers I had. I also had a group of young managers and young, they call them policy analysts, but some very bright young individuals in the public service. And I've got to tell you, there was no roadmap on how to deal with this problem. We looked at Kelowna, we looked at the fires in Brisbane, Australia, we looked at a couple of fires in the United States, but essentially with very little guidance, I had 6 young managers, all in their late 20s or early 30s, who developed a roadmap that we used to produce the plan that we're now executing in the Slave Lake region. For people who say that the public service is not worth the money you pay for it, I got to tell you, it might not be in my case, but there are some really bright young folks who are serving your needs in government. The 3 people that I credit for the success here, and you've heard them already, the Premier was brilliant. He was involved in this to making sure we had the guidance and support, but he never told us how to do it. He allowed us to figure that out ourselves. Karina was the face of the response, and as Denny said, you saw her on TV, and she brought a level of confidence across the province and across the country, quite frankly. But in my mind, it was Denny who was the quiet man, the gray man behind the scenes. Never in the public eye so much, but he was always there with a smile, a little joke, made sure everybody stayed on track. I've got to tell you, folks, these are 2 of the greatest Albertans that I have met. Thanks.